The core is the heartbeat of your business. If the core is 85% of your business and it declines by 1%, you need your innovation to grow by an incremental 10 to 15% to make up for that.
Welcome to the Persuasion Game, a marketing podcast all about growing brands and persuading consumers in the modern age by The Forge. It's the unsexy stuff that drives 85% of your revenue. So why does the core sometimes get forgotten? This week, we're talking all about the backbone of brand success, your core, with someone who's seen it from all angles, Amit Singh, with experience at Mondelez, PepsiCo, McCormick and Costa. You've worked with Amit, haven't you, Simon?
I have indeed. And what's always struck me is that Amit has always had this focus on making sure that the core of his brands that he's been working on is strong and solid before we try and do anything else.
Yeah, and we're seeing it a lot more at The Forge, aren't we? So I think coming out of COVID, we saw a lot of clients coming to us asking us about how consumer needs had changed, how occasions or consumption moments had changed, and we were getting a lot of demand spaces work as a result of it. Following that, there was a wave of briefs, wasn't there, around innovation. I think as prices started to rise in categories, brands were looking to kind of justify those price rises by bringing new products out. And now we're starting to see a wave of briefs around core, about how to revitalize the core. And so we thought today would be a really interesting discussion to bring Amit in and talk to him all about how he's done it at some of those big brands he's worked at.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
Welcome, Amit. Welcome to the Persuasion Game.
Thank you, Adam. I couldn't say no to joining the Persuasion Game because I've been a big fan of your podcast.
Well, thank you very much.
Very good to hear.
And thank you for being our very first guest in our professional studio. It's no longer a desktop recording.
Looking quite swanky, quite professional. I'm not going to lie, Adam. I'm feeling the pressure now.
I'm feeling the pressure.
So, Amit, you've worked on some of the world's, biggest brands, biggest consumer brands. And we're talking about the core today. Should we just start by defining what we mean by the core and whether that's differed in the different brands that you've worked on?
The core is the heartbeat of your business. It's basically the products that build your reputation and that still drive the bulk of your business today. When it comes to products that I've worked on, brands that I've worked on, it's Lay's Classic, it's Walker's Ready Salted and Cheese and Onion, it's Cadbury Dairy Milk in the iconic purple wrapper, Costa with their everyday range of coffees that are espresso based. The core isn't just about these products, though. I want to clarify that. In my view, it's about the moments that you own. So Lay's in social gatherings, Walker's Crisps with sandwich lunches, the little gift of Cadbury Dairy Milk as a token of appreciation or generosity. It's a combination of the product with the moment, which is basically what defines the core in my view.
That's really interesting because I think a lot of people might sort of sit there and think core is SKUs, core is flavors, core is formats, but you're really thinking about it in a much broader sense.
Yes, the way I see it is the core is not static. Your core needs to evolve with time, with changing tastes, with shift in culture, which is why if you're clear about what need you service, you will also be always prepared to meet those needs as they change.
And there's almost like an inherent strength of the business to continue to be able to service those needs, regardless almost of the different kind of products that might be needed to do it. They're ready there to do that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Invariably, across brands and businesses, we know that the core constitutes a bulk of the revenue and a disproportionate ratio of the profits as well. If the core is 85% of your business and it declines by 1%, you need your innovation to grow by an incremental 10 to 15% to make up for that.
Wow.
So it's basically the backbone of your business.
I think that's such a killer stat and such an important thing to do because, as you rightly say, if you're neglecting that engine, that fundamental part, the pressure you put on the rest of your business, the rest of your portfolio to be able to kind of compensate that. I mean, that's huge.
There's one analogy. I'm infamous for my analogy, so you'll have to bear with me today, guys. But the way I like to think of the core is, you look at your brand and think of it as an athlete's body. So your core, which is your abs and your lower back, is what keeps you stable and powerful. You can build impressive biceps, but without a strong core, something will give someday. Your posture crumbles, your movement gets limited, and invariably, injury follows. The same holds true for brands. Strength starts at the core, always. I can't state this enough. I'm sounding a bit like my personal trainer probably, but I'm sure
he would be very
happy.
proud that the message has landed, Amit. This is excellent.
Yeah. I try and fit that in everywhere.
I think that's really interesting point, because one of the things you can often see is almost sort of brands trying to sort of innovate their way out of a core strategic problem, that actually the core's not terribly healthy. And so businesses jump to kind of thinking, oh, well, we need to innovate, we need to move on. And I wonder if it's a bit of a symptom of some other facets.
It's rarely a conscious decision to ignore the core. No marketing team sits down, at least I'd like to believe they don't, and say, let's ignore our biggest revenue driver. But it happens gradually, almost accidentally in some cases. The danger is when the core is seen as maintenance work. Oh, it's 80% of our revenue. It's going to continue the way it has been for the last 50 years.
So, I mean, if you're stepping into the role then on a new brand, how do you assess whether the core is strong enough?
First and foremost, it's one of the things that my first marketing director used to hammer home into the heads of every new marketer. You need to be in bed with the consumer. Not literally, obviously. You need to.
I think there's some GDPR guidelines about that now. I think I'm not sure, but I think so.
15 years ago, it was a little more liberal.
Oh, it was fine. It was fine. Different times.
You need to understand their habits, stay on top of trends, and genuinely believe that you're a part of their lives. And this takes a lot of deep insight work to unlock growth drivers, identify opportunities by understanding their core needs. As an example, there's ethnography, which is understanding how the category is serving their needs, what's missing, what the opportunities to drive further growth. Is the brand purpose sharp? Is it actually helping you answer to a need that you've identified in the consumer work you've done? And is it so solid enough, a combination of sharp, but also broad enough to actually last for the next 10 years? That's the first thing I would look at. Next, I would look at some basic metrics. Are you still driving category growth like you did in your peak or purple patch? Are you losing share? Is your brand healthy? Are your brand health metrics reflecting the strength of the brand, or are you actually seeing the gap between you and competition narrowing?
Lots of great questions in there about ways to diagnose the health of the core. But I'm wondering almost if there's a question that sits before that, which is something interestingly that we often find very interesting when we talk to people, which is just asking across a business, what is your core? And seeing the different answers you get.
Yes, and even if people are defining it consistently, let's start with best case scenario here. Are you defining it through the lens of the consumer need you serve? Or are you describing a product feature? I think that's the risk. Nike is a great example of a brand that basically looks at its raison d'etre from the point of view of what role they play in people's lives. If you have a body, you're an athlete. That's where they start from. If they were only thought about, we make shoes, right? In what other ways can we make shoes relevant or are shoes top of mind? They would play in a very, very narrow space. So they have a very tight definition of the role they play. And therefore, all the activation and innovation goes towards servicing that reason for existence.
Amit, can I just ask another question just on the follow-up of the definition of the core? So you've talked compellingly about the financial argument, right? If it's 85% of your sales. What's your view on the role of brand equity to define the core? So I'm minded of my own experience many, many, many years ago working on Lucozade Energy. And at the time, sort of early 2000s, for any of our listeners based in the UK, you will no doubt remember that cellophane wrapped bottle of sort of, 750 a litre, which was synonymous with childhoods of the 70s and 80s of illness and things like that. And it carried so much emotional resonance, even though, and actually we did, the team brought it back as a sort of limited edition run and those kind of things. Now, Arguably, that wasn't necessarily the most positive aspect of the equity because it was sort of more rooted in illness and the brand wanted to kind of move away from it. But it's just interesting thinking, I think, about, whether there are certain parts of your portfolio that may carry an outsized equity impact proportionate to the value sort of contribution they make.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's, there's this famous saying, I can't remember the other brand, but if all the Coca-Cola factories burn down overnight, a bulk of the brand's value would still be intact the next day. And that just reinforces the strength of, I guess, the brand. It's very difficult to separate, coming back to the example of Walker's, cheese and onion and ready salted with the core equity of the brand. I can't imagine a world where you would see, Gary Lineker holding one of the tail SKUs in the comms, or them activating it with one of the tail SKUs, because it wouldn't carry the same weight. Over a period of time, I think it blends with the equity of the brand, so they become synonymous with what the brand stands for, rather than being one of the 20 SKUs that you have.
But interestingly, I have seen it the other way. I have seen where a extension to the core almost becomes the brand itself, and actually that was one of the big challenges that Lucozade had, where Lucozade Sports sort of almost became the defining version of Lucozade. And so, done consciously and done well, that absolutely is your principle of keeping the core rejuvenated and keeping it relevant, etc. But potentially done badly or without due diligence and consciousness, then what you can potentially do is undermine your core and sort of end up kind of eating yourself.
Your experience on Lucozade was also driven by the need to survive. So, if you had to be in the game for a longer period and win the right consumer group, was it better being a, medicinal, more nutrition-based brand, or was it better to be associated with sport, which obviously came with a certain personality and tribe attached to it? Look at the example of Pepsi Max. I mean, 20 years ago, Pepsi Max was an innovation, was what, I don't have the stats, but 5% of the portfolio maybe. Today, Pepsi Max is huge, and you don't see any Pepsi now. Now, it's a conscious decision by the organization to, put the no sugar drink forward as the face of the brand.
If you defined your core as a SKU, that's a very hard decision to make.
Yeah.
If you define your core as an occasion about bringing people together, about celebration, about camaraderie, about connection, it's a logical thing, which I guess goes back to just reinforcing how important that occasion-based thinking is.
Absolutely. Agree.
Amit, where have you seen the biggest successes in your career for growing the core?
The biggest wins that I've seen don't just come from pushing the core harder. They come from reframing it in a fresh and culturally relevant context. So I can give you an example from a market that will not be familiar to the audience, at least in the UK, where we are sitting at the moment. I started my career at Cadbury India, now Mondelez, obviously. This is not an example of a campaign that I worked on. I just want to clarify that. It's one of the big regrets I have in my career. It's one of those campaigns where you wish, you had been part of it. Anyway, we all have regrets, I'm sure. First, some context. The brand Cadbury had 70% market share in India. As you would expect with a brand with that level of market share, it was synonymous with the category, at least in urban India, where chocolates were reasonably big. And the team had to unlock new opportunities for growth, which could not rely on growing share. You can't go much higher than 70%, even though we did have pressure to grow it beyond that. The per caps was not as high as some other more established markets like the UK. So that was a blessing in disguise. What the team did was, and the insights team played a big role in that, they did not change the product at all. They changed the role the product played in people's lives. So from just chocolate, they basically reframed the product and the brand to a sweet treats that belongs in Indian celebrations as a credible substitute for Indian mithai. Mithai is a Hindi word for traditional sweets. So that single reframe of positioning Cadbury chocolates and Cadbury dairy milk as a very easy to access, longer shelf life because Indian mithai has a 1 week shelf life. Invariably, it's lying around in the house and gets thrown away. The kids don't like it as much as they like chocolates, etc. There's a whole ecosystem around of reasons behind why chocolates could fit in that space. Allowed the team to actually unlock a plethora of occasions that were based around moments when Indian mithai used to be gifted or consumed. So whenever somebody does well in an exam, Simon, you were talking about your daughter giving mock exams. So next time she finishes her exam, give her a bar of Cadbury Dairy Milk.
Don't give her ideas, Amit. She puts me under enough pressure as it is. There you go.
So it's I'm trying to relate it to the everyday cultural context. Every time this somebody gets promoted, right, instead of traditional mithai, get Cadbury chocolates for them. It's easier to share. You could take it home. The kids could have it, etc., etc. These are just two examples, but there were lots of occasions where we could credibly place the brand in that occasion, and growth just exploded after that. Now, connecting the brand with a particular moment is easier said than done, but the reason I'm giving that example is to basically provoke how one should look at identifying opportunities for growth with your core, how you can look at reinventing and renovating the core.
And I love that because, again, it just keeps going back to that idea of rejuvenation. It's still the same fundamental product, but maybe it's wearing a new skin. It's a new decoration. So there is change, but it's a very similar version. It's just tailored to something specific.
And it has to start or come from the point of view of wanting to drive category growth and not just steal from competitors. I've mostly worked on brands that were more established in my career, so I just want to put that out. So it's easier for me to say that because the only option for us to grow is not stealing share, but expanding the category. But I firmly believe in the limited experience I have on challenger brands as well. If you approach it from the point of view of how you can disrupt the market, drive growth, which is incremental to the category, the more you're setting yourself up for success, over a slightly longer period. And, put yourself in the shoes of the retailer. We know how important the retailer and the buyer is. If you're just talking about stealing share, which buyer would be interested in your product or in your plans to grow the brand? So it has to come from the place of wanting to grow the category and define the category as not necessarily how it exists today, but through the lens of what consumer needs you want to service, and therefore, what will it look like in the next 5 years?
And again, that goes back to your demand space is a really strong view of where is the value in the market today, where is the future value in the market as well.
Absolutely. That's your plug for the demand space.
I've got to get it in. I'm contractually obliged.
To do some demand spaces?
Do you know what, Adam? Now you come to mention it, I have heard the Forge is quite good. I don't know. I'm totally impartial on this. Well done, Adam. Give Amit his fiver for the plug. So that's good. Excellent.
So look, I love that example, and I think occasions keeps coming up as a theme in this discussion. It's all very well thinking, okay, it works in less mature markets, but some of our brand owners, brand managers that might be listening to this might be thinking about, what opportunities are there for unlocking occasions in the same kind of way in kind of more developed or more kind of competitive markets. Have you got examples from stuff that you've done unlocking occasions in I guess a more challenging environment?
Occasions, and this principle holds true irrespective of, the maturity of the market, at least in my opinion, or the maturity of the category within your market as well. So occasion-based thinking shifts you from selling products to owning moments in people's lives. And that's fundamental to setting your brand up for success in the long term. So you can sell chocolate or you can help people celebrate better. Mm-hmm. You can sell crisps or you can make lunchtime more enjoyable. The latter, I'd like to believe, is infinitely more powerful because it taps into established human behaviors and needs, right? And this is, what comes back to the demand spaces. So it's not about fighting for a bigger slice of the same pie, but it's about baking a bigger pie together through that moment-based and occasion-based thinking. I can give you an example of an innovation that I launched across a few markets when I was on Walkers and Lay's. So it was called Strong. Under Walker's, we launched it under the sub-brand called Max. So Walker's Max Strong. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Well, I remember Max was the paprika ones, and then Max
Absolutely.
Strong was the jalapeno
And cheese.
and
oh,
cheese.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
That's my favorite.
Yeah.
I hope you had it with beer, though.
You have to have it with beer to get the spice out your mouth.
Excellent. So that's the example. So we engineered the product specifically for beer drinking occasions. So it was a thicker cut with ridges. We added bolder flavors to cut through the occasion that you were in with beer or with another cold drink in hand. It was still recognizably Lay's, but designed to shine in that specific moment. It was slightly meatier, a bit more of a gut fill than just the regular crisps. When you do that, where you allow the brand to still be inextricably what it is, which is what it was in that case, which is Walker's and Lay's. It's giving you a crisp texture. It is a potato crisps. And it comes in exciting, bold flavors. So it was very, very Walker's or Lay's. But it was still extending into new moments without distracting from what the brand stands for. So we saw incremental growth with a younger cohort, which was, into these occasions. And it also actually ended up having a halo on the brand's flavor credentials, because flavor is the number one driver of choice in the category. I think it still is. It was definitely when I was in the category. So that's another example of taking the brand, extending it into a new occasion with an innovation in this case, but surrounded by an activation as well, which just heroed and gave us an excuse to play in that occasion. When I look at these two examples that I just gave, which is either Cadbury stepping into culturally relevant moments or Lay's tapping into beer moments, the common thread is really simple. It's not just about selling more product. It's about finding moments in people's lives where the brand could genuinely belong. And that's basically at the crux of how you stretch the brand into different moments by being more centered and obsessed about where you want to play and then figuring out how you take your brand there.
I think that's a really important word that you said in there, which is genuinely. And I think that's really key, because I think a lot of the time you can see people kind of going, could we? And you sit there and think, well, I can understand why you as a brand would want to go there. It's a big opportunity. It's incremental. It's all of those things. But why does a consumer want that? Why are you actually going to make this occasion better for me? And again, back to your point about the rigor of really maybe not sleeping with your consumer, getting into bed with your consumer, but really understanding them and sitting from their perspective to go, why are you going to make this better for me? So that we're actually kind of, again, stepping away perhaps from a little bit of the bubble that we can all fall into, right? When we're so close to our brands, thinking we're suddenly going to play this hero role, and actually just stepping back and going, really, what genuinely difference am I making here?
Absolutely. And I also want to add one thing. I don't know if it was clear in what I was saying earlier. It's not about occasions versus innovation. The best core growth happens a lot of times when you combine and blend the two. So, you innovate in service of occasions, always, not just for the sake of it, because, hey, there's a trend we've spotted in the market and we haven't dabbled into it, and somebody else is going to take our market share away. It might help you in the first 6 months because of the novelty factor, but if it's not relevant, then you'll be hunting for the next innovation 12 months down the line.
Do you see there being a right way to kind of have innovation support the core? And if so, kind of what is it? Like, what is the right balance of kind of getting those two, the new and the kind of heritage, and combining the two together?
The best innovation orbits the core. It modernizes, it stretches, but it doesn't detach the core. So I believe the right way is when innovation amplifies what you stand for and doesn't distract from it.
So we've talked a lot about, focusing on the core, focusing on your strengths, and focusing on the thing that, got you to where you are today. But obviously a lot of the disruption that happens in a category happens at the edges. And if you're looking after a big brand, at some point you're going to need to start moving in some of these different or disruptive spaces. So how do you decide when the right place to jump is and the right place to move into those?
The edges, as you call it, show you where the next strong branch might be. I always say that your job as a marketer is to protect the core, but watch the edges. for the incremental opportunities. Track what's bubbling up, so small brands, niche needs, emerging occasions, etc. But filter everything through the lens of, is it relevant to my reason to exist? Does it threaten my brand's future? Will playing in that help make my core stronger or weaker? The edges actually show you are opportunities to identify where your core could evolve. So for big brands, it's crucial to identify the right moment to jump onto a trend that you could then scale. I fundamentally believe, and this might be controversial, it's not the first to market that wins.
Couldn't agree with you more.
It's the one that does the best job and sticks at it while still meeting consumer needs. Occasions, I can't state this enough. I'm sitting in the company of amazing team from Forge, so I must say it again. Occasions are your compass. So, I would recommend tracking emerging occasions and not just emerging products. Stay rooted to your brand's core truth. That's really important. And finally, we live in a very data-heavy world. Too much data, in my view, but still, data is very, very useful. So use tools like social listening, retail data, and more than just looking at which segments are growing, and then dive deeper into why they are growing. Is there a macro or micro trend that's basically leading to that? So when your core is strong, you're not threatened by what's emerging. It just absorbs it, evolves, and helps you identify opportunities to grow new branches to be still culturally relevant and alive.
Amit, thank you. That has been an absolutely fascinating discussion with you. Incredible insight that you've provided from your experience across so many brands, and fantastic to see your enthusiasm and passion for the core. Your personal trainer will be delighted. Your brands will be delighted. And thank you for joining us on the Persuasion Game.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
That's been brilliant. Thank you so much, Amit.
Thank you, guys.
Well, I don't know about you, Simon, but I found that really interesting. What a generous guest we've had today sharing all of that with us.
Fascinating. Really, really interesting. So much to take out. One of the things I'm left reflecting on is how this is not a zero-sum game. And somehow the narrative has almost become a bit of a binary one. You either do the core or you do innovation. And it's become a sort of slightly adversarial dynamic. And I don't really know why. Because as Amit told us, this is just common sense. This is about doing both. I had a little bit of a sort of language reflection. And I wonder if there's something in just the fact that some of this language, by using the word the letters re at the beginning of it, it almost implies like you're redoing something, that it's going backwards, that it's revisiting, it's not new. And by contrast, innovation is new. By definition, it's new. It's exciting. I wonder how much we've let the language kind of cloud our judgment, because you listen to the examples that Amit's talking about. These are hugely exciting campaigns that any marketer would just be unbelievably excited and delighted to have under their, those successes on their CV.
I think human nature is written, all over this, right? You've got the human nature to want to go after the new. You've also got the human nature to, once you've done a job, you want it to be done. You don't want to have to go back and continually do the same job. So there's something like, we've done the core, we've thought about our growth plans for the core for the next 2 or 3 years. But the idea that you've got to go back and continually refresh those, I think there's a sort of like slight aversion to that, isn't there?
There is. So here we go. Answers on a postcard from our listeners. Come up with some new language for us. We're not going to rejuvenate the core. We're not going to refresh the core. We're not going to renovate the core. What should we do? What is the new language that we can do to change that? Because as you've said, there is so much to be excited about with the core. It is just common sense and great marketing.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. We certainly did, being in the new studio. We're into phase 2 of the Persuasion Game podcast, and we would love it if you could help us grow it with family, friends, colleagues, anyone that you think might enjoy what we're doing here.